I'm Hoffmann, professional photographer and instructor. In my previous video, I discussed some of the fundamentals of photography. In this class, I'm going to dive a little deeper and go beyond the fundamentals and talk about some of the more advanced photography concepts and techniques. I'll show how to approach any photographic situation and break it down into easy-to-remember tips that'll help ensure you get the image you have in mind. I'll explore some of the more advanced capabilities of your Nikon DSLR and show you how to conquer the most challenging lighting situations and still make great pictures. I'll demonstrate how to use and control Nikon speed lights while off camera to get amazing results. I'll also show you how to work with your images after you've taken them to enhance and adjust them within seconds. So join me as we go beyond the fundamentals and explore a wide variety of ideas and techniques that will take your photography to an entirely new level. Whenever I'm out taking pictures, there are three things I'm constantly thinking about. First is subject, second is light, third is composition. Subject seems obvious, but it's important that you're really sure what it is you want the viewer to see in that picture, because that's how you're going to build that scene. Light involves exposure, ISO, shutter speed, aperture, as well as color, which we'll control with white balance. And then composition, the third one, may be most important. Where am I going to place my subject in the frame? How am I going to use that frame, horizontally or vertically? Am I going to use some of the guidelines we have in composition, like rule of thirds, leading lines, diagonals? And am I going to work with triggers that will draw people into the picture, such as human figures? If there's a human figure there, people are going to look at that human figure. If there's eyes, they're going to look to the eyes. So there's a lot of compositional tools we can use to make sure that our viewer gets the experience we want them to have. Those are some of the things we're going to be talking about in this class: subject, light, and composition. The question I get most often is, how do I take pictures of action in low light? And in my opinion, that is the most challenging situation most photographers will find themselves in. To show how I work in that situation, we're going to take pictures of Jalen on a stage in a theater under a spotlight. And she's a dancer, so there's going to be movement, I've got a lot of darkness around her, and I've got bright light on her. That is a tough combination. But with the right management of exposure, white balance, the right lens, and a little understanding of how to take advantage of some of the advanced features of these cameras, I can make really good pictures there. That looked great, Jalen. So this afternoon, I'm going to do some photos of Jalen. And we asked our director if we could stay after the rehearsal to do some pictures. And that's the way to do something. Come to a dress rehearsal or arrange to go before or after, when you can have the run of the theater and you've got the lights up and you've got the person in their outfit. As always, I'm going to start with subject, light, and composition. Jalen's my subject. That's easy. As far as composition goes, I've got a dark stage, and I'm going to photograph this a little looser. Normally, I like to compose tightly with my camera, but she's going to be moving, running, jumping, and I want to make sure I keep her in the frame. The big challenge, of course, here is with the light. These are very challenging situations to shoot in because of the light, or I should say the lack of light. There's not a lot in the theater. We've got a spotlight on Jalen, and then we've got some dim light back there. And I've also got a very large, dark space to work with. So you might be curious how I'm managing exposure in this situation, because I've got all that darkness behind her, and that's a situation that will often throw off a metering system. Metering systems looks at the frame area and tries to figure out what the right exposure is. In this case, I've got so much darkness around Jalen that while I would be in matrix metering 98% of the time, this is exactly the situation where I'd choose to go to spot metering. I'll use that small circle that it's going to give me, and I can meter off the front of her outfit, which is very bright. That's all it cares about. The meter's not going to think about anything going on in the background. So I like using spot metering, but let me go ahead and show you what happens if I used matrix metering. That's perfect. Just a simple pose like that. Very nice. Yeah, so I'm looking at the one with matrix metering, and she's overexposed. I've lost detail on her face, I've lost detail on her outfit, it's flashing. If I look at the histogram for that, I'll see it's hitting the right side, which means it's clipping. That's what the overexposure is. Now, let me switch it back to spot metering. And ready. If I go to the next picture where I used spot metering, I'll see I have no flashing highlights. It's giving me a good, accurate reading off of her outfit. And then when I look at that histogram, I also see that it's far to the left, and that's not surprising. It's mostly dark material in that frame, a little bit of bump in the middle and to the right of middle, which is her and her outfit. So that spot metering works perfect in this situation. Let's do another jump, okay? All right, whenever you're ready. Now, I want to make sure I'm stopping action as well. She's going to be doing leaps, she's going to be doing spins, so I need a fairly high shutter speed. This is how I tackle that. A lot of people would think you'd want to be at shutter priority, and sometimes that can work for you. But you have to be careful in shutter priority because you can choose a shutter speed, which means the camera's locked at that, but in the action you're shooting, there is not enough light, your camera can't open the lens to compensate for it, and you end up with an underexposed picture. Instead, I'm going to use aperture priority, and I'm going to use a 50mm 1/8 lens, a fast aperture lens. It can open very wide to let a lot of light in. And of course, I need a high ISO, and I'd like to have a fast shutter speed. And I could sort that all out manually, but then I have to worry that the lighting is going to be consistent across the stage. If the lighting isn't consistent across the stage, then some of my exposures could be right on, some of them could be way off. Instead, I'm going to take advantage of a couple of nice features. I'm going to use auto ISO sensitivity control. It lets me set a base ISO I'd like to be at, and it could be 100 or 200, even though I couldn't use that in here. And then I'm going to tell the camera I will let it go as high as 8,000 to maintain a certain shutter speed. In this case, because Jalen's going to do some jumps and some spins, I'm going to tell it I'd like to have a 6/40th of a second. So it will shift the ISO to maintain that using my 1.8 lens. So let's go ahead and do that. Why don't you do a couple of leaps for me across? Ready? Go ahead. Nice. Okay, back up a little further. I want you right in the center when you jump. Good, go ahead. Great, let me check that. That's looking really nice. Now, let's take advantage of a couple more features. For one thing, I'm shooting single frame and she's doing a jump, so my timing has to be really good. Instead, I want to take advantage of a continuous high on my camera. Let's do that again, Jalen. Start from this side, jump across. Whenever you're ready. That's nice. That gives me more to choose from. This camera will do 10 frames a second, but regardless what frame rate your camera does, if you're shooting action like this, make sure you set it on high frame rate. Now you might be wondering, how am I making sure to keep Jalen in focus? And that means I'm working with the autofocus options my camera's got. Out of the box, the camera's going to be set for AFS, single servo autofocus, and that's what you want to use if you're photographing a non-moving subject. I always tell people the S stands for static, not moving. If you have action, then of course you want to be able to track and keep that action in focus, which means you want to have your camera set for AFC. Once you're in AFC, you'll find there are a bunch of options as far as how AFC can work, continuous autofocus. I always suggest people start with the dynamic options. Dynamic means the camera's going to give you an active focus point, so I want to keep that focus point on Jalen, but it will also use some surrounding point to try to maintain focus. So if I'm following her across the stage and I get my active point off her briefly, those other points will jump in and keep her in focus. If I keep it off her for more than about a second, the camera says, oh, you want the focus there, and then it will jump. But dynamic AFC is a great way to start working with moving subjects. Let's do that jump, okay? Let's try that again. Good, one more time. Nice. You may have also noticed that when I'm shooting, my thumb is moving back here. That's because I'm doing something called back button autofocus. I can program my camera to take autofocus off of my shutter button. I like doing that because it lets me turn autofocus on and off simply by pressing the thumb down. If she's moving, I'm keeping my thumb down. If she stops and I want to do a portrait, I simply press down and let go. That way I separate shooting pictures from focusing, which is a nice different way to think and an advanced technique you might want to try. Let's do the spins. I love those spins. Good. Hang on a second. Do that one more time. So you can probably guess by the sound of the shutter speed there, I've decided to change things up. Until now, it's all been about stopping action as Jalen moves around the stage. I switched. I turned off auto ISO. I went to 200 ISO. I got my shutter speed down to about a 60th of a second. And then I started closing my aperture down to get even slower and slower shutter speeds so I can try to create some interesting blur going across. Let me have you do the spin one more time. Hold on a second. I'm going to try for about a 15th of a second. Okay, go ahead when you're ready. Super. Anytime I'm in artificial light, like that theater, I'm thinking white balance. I want to make sure that I'm getting color that's believable, that looks correct. In that case, auto white balance worked great for me. But if it didn't, if I was seeing a color cast, then I would have created a preset white balance using the features of my camera. Anytime you're in artificial light, you have to be concerned with white balance. What color temperature are these lights putting out? I don't know. Auto white balance works well in most situations. In photographing Jalen tonight, it worked great. The whites looked white, all the colors were where they were supposed to be. However, if they didn't, that's why I have this. I would use this to create a custom white balance, a preset white balance. Most Nikon DSLRs will let you do that. With this model, I simply hold my WB button down and cycle it from auto where I had it over to pre. Let up for a moment, hold down again for a couple seconds, and the pre starts flashing. At that point, the camera expects me to take a picture of a neutral target, which is what I've got right here. The top of the camera will then say good or no GD for no good. Good means it got enough data to get an accurate reading, and now the camera is ready to shoot in this light and give me colors exactly where they're supposed to be. However, if I was shooting in raw format, which is how I do shoot, even if I made a mistake with white balance, I could correct that after the fact. That's one of the great advantages to raw format. As photographers, we love working with early morning and late daylight. I was just out to do a sunrise shoot at a lighthouse. Now, when I go out to do a sunrise shoot, what I'm hoping for is beautiful light, color in the sky, maybe some clouds, but I'm out there and I'm going to make pictures regardless. Keep in mind, if you're out in conditions that most people don't go out in, you're going to make pictures that most people aren't making.
So we've got a nice brisk morning to be out here for our lighthouse shoot. We always approach subject, light, composition. My subject's the lighthouse. Sunrise is providing my light. I'm hoping for some color, interesting things going on in the sky. Composition becomes really important. It is always really important. And in this case, I want to look at how I'm framing the lighthouse. There's a flagpole out in front of me. And if I move a little to the right or the left, I'll put that in the sky and it will compete with the lighthouse for attention. So I've lined the flagpole up so it'll disappear into the silhouette of the lighthouse. It also gives me nice framing of the bushes leading into the lighthouse building out of the frame.
Of course, if you're doing a sunrise or a sunset, it's important to know more than just the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. There are apps for the smartphone that will show you exactly where it's going to come up and at what times, and to help you position yourself in the right place for the shot you want to make. I like to take advantage of the automatic features the camera offers me that are going to help me make pictures faster and more easily, quite honestly. And one of those is automatic exposure. Most of the time I work in aperture priority. That way I'm choosing the aperture which is controlling depth of field in a lot of my pictures.
As you can see, I'm on a tripod. That's because I'm doing a fairly low exposure. I could push my ISO way up and probably shoot handheld, but I'd rather work at the lower ISOs, a little less chance of noise. Also, it's pretty windy here. So you notice I have the strap around my neck. That may seem silly, but if there's a gust of wind that pushes the tripod over, I'm not going to lose my camera.
General rule on tripods is any tripod, the taller you make it, the less stable it's going to be. And keep in mind, of course, the reason you're putting the camera on there is to be stable. So don't make it any higher than it needs to be. And since stability is your big concern, that usually means you're working at a lower shutter speed. You don't want to do anything that's going to introduce movement to the camera. There's a couple little tricks you can do if you don't have a remote to trigger the camera. You can take advantage of the self-timer that's built into your camera. Most Nikon DSLRs will let you go into the menu and set that down to 2 seconds, which means that you push the shutter button, get away from the camera, 2 seconds later it shoots the picture. Some Nikon DSLRs also have a feature in the menus called exposure delay mode, which you can often set for a half second, 1 second, 2 second. What that means is when the shutter trips, it's actually going to flip the mirror up before the shutter fires and then pause for that amount of time before the shutter fires, again reducing the amount of opportunity for any movement on the camera. So you can combine self-timer and exposure delay mode on those cameras to make sure you're getting a very stable position for that camera, no movement when it actually takes the picture.
So with the sun coming up over there, right now I'm using a 16-80, which gives me a nice framing, and as the light comes up, I think I'll go back to it. But I want to get some of that color over to the side there, so I think I'll switch to a super wide. I'm going to put a 10 to 24 millimeter on here. And now I'll recompose now, and I can bring in some of that color from the side. All right, this is working pretty well, but if I look off further east, I can see more color on the horizon over there. So I'm going to change my angle, change my position to see if I can bring that into the picture. Yeah, that's looking much better. I love having the color of the horizon going out and those little patchy clouds. And also as I'm shooting, I'm shifting my exposure. I'm picking where I think I need to be, and then I'm coming down using my plus-minus button. So looking at my pictures, while I start in the sunny daylight setting because I'm in daylight, I also know I can shift the color. So I'm going to try some shots at cloudy and shady as well. Those will give me a little warmer rendition of the tones back there. Here's another thing. I have nothing close to me. The lighthouse is the closest foreground subject I've got. So there's no need for me to be at a very small aperture, f11, f16, f22. That's simply going to mean I'm going to be shooting at much slower shutter speeds. Instead, I'm going to be at f5.6. 5.6 with this 10 to 24. I have no problems having the lighthouse sharp and having the sky behind it sharp. So I've changed position again. The sunrise is remaining about the same, so I wanted to shoot from different angles. Also, I'm getting more clouds off to the left here. I want to try to bring them in. I'm also working with that super wide, which gives me a lot of selection in how I compose this picture, how close I go in on the lighthouse or how wide I frame it. And I'm trying to shoot as many variations as I can because that'll give me more choice afterwards. We've got a beautiful sunrise happening out there. It's starting to peek through the clouds. We got great color. I'm not a huge fan of just colorful sunsets. They're pretty. I'm hoping something happens out there and a seagull just flew through. That'll be the picture, I think. And remember, with a sunrise, you've got that really bright area. You're probably going to have to underexpose. Since I'm hand holding, I want to make sure I've got a high shutter speed. I also want to make sure I have vibration reduction turned on. I can stay at that lower ISO. I'm still at 200 because I'm letting the lens work at its maximum aperture, f5.6. Depth of field isn't important, just the color and the light and what's happening out there. Oh, this is great. So now that the sun is up, I'm working with the light it's giving me. I'm getting great side light on the lighthouse, and I wanted to bring in a foreground element, so I came out into the grasses and I'm taking a low angle, staying with my super wide, letting those grasses blow into the sky to the side of the lighthouse. I'm also having to work with exposure. I've got that dark blue sky, so I'm actually plus exposure a little bit. And because these are blowing, I need to make sure I'm getting a fairly high shutter speed. I want to be around 1,000 so I don't have blur in the grasses. I'm staying fairly wide with my aperture. I think I've been working at f6.3, 7.1 because I want these grasses sharp, but I don't really want the lighthouse in focus. What's in focus is where the viewer's eye go. It's one of those triggers to guide them through the picture. I want them to see the grasses. They'll still know that's a lighthouse back there. We got a beautiful scene we're working with here. I just need the wind to cooperate and blow those grasses over this way. And there it goes. Occasionally it happens right, there we are, right the way I need it. That's good.
At one point in the morning, we had a nice overcast sky. Now, normally photographers wouldn't call an overcast sky nice, but I wanted to do some portraits of amber. And that is beautiful light, soft light, pleasing light, not creating any harsh shadows. Portrait photography is just like any other type of photography in that we're thinking about subject, light, and composition. But in portrait photography, we already have our subject, so that's easy. Now we're looking at light and composition. And a day like today, bright overcast, that's perfect for portraits because it's nice soft light. Now it comes down to composition, and in portraits, composition is mostly about background. And that's the problem with this picture I was just shooting. We have a terrible background. We have a bright sky that's going to overexpose. We have tree limbs sticking out of the side of Amber's head. So we need to find a better location. So Amber, let's go find something. I think right here. Yeah, why don't you just sit on the corner there? Yeah, this will work a lot better. So Amber and I have moved over to a better location to have a better background. We don't want the background to be distracting. And I'm using the 16-80 to 8-4 DX lens, and I'm going to shoot it wide open because I want to create some shallow depth of field. So let's go ahead and give that a try. Good, drop your chin a little to me. Nice, perfect, just like that is good. Okay, so this is looking a lot better, and I'm wide open at f4, but I'd like to have shallower depth of field. There are grasses behind her head, and I want to make sure we don't see those poking up. So a faster aperture lens, like a 1.8 or a 1.4 lens, will help me achieve that. And I've got an 85 1.4 here, so let me swap that out real quickly. And I want to make sure I'm wide open at 1.4, and yeah, I can see through the viewfinder how much more out of focus that background is. That's really going to help me. I'm also making sure that I've got my autofocus point on her near eye. Her face is turned a little bit. I need the focus to be right here. So I'm shifting my autofocus point up to that eye and making sure it's right on that spot, because at 1.4, I have no depth of field. That eye could easily be out of focus if I'm not paying attention. I gotta be careful with that. That looks good. Perfect. That looks really good. Now, we do have nice light out here. It's soft light. What about supplementing it? And if I want to supplement it, I don't want to bring it from the camera. I want to take advantage of getting light off camera. And I actually happen to have a little box of portable sunshine over here. So I'm going to get a speed light out. I can set a speed light up on a stand off to the side of Amber and simulate some light coming in from the side. I just don't want it very strong, so I'm going to do some things to control it. Let's get it turned on. I'm going to have it in remote mode. All right. When I set up a light like this, I want it a little above my subject most of the time, angle in on them. Because again, I want to simulate some light coming in from the sky into Amber's face. That ought to work pretty well. Maybe just a tad higher. Good. All right, so I've got the speed light set on remote mode because I want to use commander mode on the camera. That means the pop-up flash is going to talk to this. The receiver for the speed light's on this side. So let's go ahead and rotate the head. And I'm going to turn this around so the receiver is pointed towards my camera. That way it's going to make sure and see the signal. So let's get my position over here. Using commander mode, again, means this pop-up flash is going to talk to and control this speed light. there's a couple things I want to do. In the menu, I can tell it I want it to control the speed light, but I don't want it to contribute light during the exposure. So you're going to see it flash. That's doing a pre-flash to judge exposure, and it's working with the speed light to do that. But at the moment the shutter opens, this flash stops firing, and that one continues. Let's see what happens. That looks good. Oh, we got beautiful light on your face. Now here's the other thing. I want to maintain that shallow depth of field, that f1.4 that I was using before. Normally, if I'm using flash, I'm limited at flash sync, which will be a 200th or a 250th of a second. Most Nikon cameras let me turn on something called Auto FP. It lets me break that flash sync. So now the flash can actually be used at a higher shutter speed where it's pulsing instead of just putting out one burst of light. So it's providing constant illumination as the shutter strip crosses the sensor. In fact, right now I'm shooting at a 1600th at 1.4. Again, letting me maintain very shallow depth of field, but add some light in from the side. Let's do a couple more, that's great. Good. If I decide this is a little more powerful than I'd like it, I can come into the menu on the back of the camera, come into commander mode, and tell it I want that group, it's set for group A, to put less power out. I'll leave it on TTL. I like the flash and the camera to do all the thinking for me as much as possible. I'll power it down some. I can go from 1/3 stop down to 3 stops. So let's try a -1, and let's see what happens now. You're doing great, Amber, that's good. That's good, so it's looking more natural. The key with flash is most of the time you either want to create natural light or create an effect. I don't want hard flash hitting her. I just want soft flash filling in the shadows, maybe giving a little catch light in her eyes. Awesome, looks great. As I walk around looking for pictures, I'm always keeping in mind subject, light, composition. There are lots of rules, or what I like to call guidelines to composition. All that really comes down to is things that are pleasing to the human eye, arrangements that are pleasing. As I walked the grounds of the lighthouse, I found one side wall of the building that had 3 windows with a white wall. That would be a great space to work with. In composition, one of the rules is odd numbers are more interesting than even, so I've got the 3 windows. I've also got this blank white wall and lines, horizontal lines across the top where the red roof is, and across the bottom where it goes off into paving stones. All right, Amber, you look good just like that. Let's see how this frames up and exposes. Okay, so I've got mostly a white wall. I need to overexpose a little. I'm going to push my exposure compensation up. Let's try 2/3 because I want that white to remain bright white. The meter's trying to average things out, so with that much white, it's likely to go a little gray. Give that a try. Much better. Okay, so we've done the center shot. Now let's see what happens if we off-center. Amber, slide over, perfect, right in between those windows. Try to center you up. Good, hands in the pocket. That's great, that's good. Real defiant look there, right at me. Nice smile. Perfect. Okay, let's change your position. Maybe lean into the wall, cross your legs. Yeah, that's it, I like that. One arm down, right at me again, good. Perfect. Let's switch up the composition a little. Why don't you move over into the corner where the building meets the crack? We're going to shift her over further even and see how that works. One of the great things you can do with digital photography is shoot lots. There's no penalty to it, right? So if you've got a nice scene and good things are going on, don't just shoot a couple of frames and move on. Work it, work it, work it. That's good. Bring your left leg in a little bit closer. That's it, that's it. Okay, and maybe left arm tucked in. Good. Yeah. Right here. Bring your face more to me. Great. That's nice. Now let me try with just 2 windows, because you'll be the 3rd element. Perfect. Now, if you look at those pictures, you'll notice she's a small part of the picture, but she's absolutely the subject. And that's another compositional guideline. When you have people in a picture, the viewers are going to look at the people in the picture. We can't help it. We're humans. We're interested in humans. So as a photographer, you have to remember that if you have a person in the picture, your viewer is going to look there. Anytime you have the opportunity to take advantage of a unique angle, you should take it. In our case, we were able to get up in the lighthouse. It was worth the 191 steps to the top, because up there, we're up high looking down. And when I have that opportunity, I'm thinking two things. I'm thinking super wide, maybe even a fisheye lens, and then I also want to use my longer lenses. Anytime you're in a tight, confined space, that's a great opportunity to take advantage of a super wide lens, something like a 10 to 24, the 12 to 24, or in this case, the 10.5 millimeter 2.8 fisheye. Not only is it super fast, it's super wide, gives me a neat look at the corners, and lets me make, in a space like this, some really interesting, different kind of pictures. Since I'm in here and we're so close to this light, I want to photograph it too. Again, I'll need a super wide. Challenge working with wide-angle lenses a lot of times is controlling your edges. Remember, we're talking subject, light, composition. And we can get so focused mentally on the subject that we're not paying attention to the edges. Things can creep in, we don't intend to be there. So I know what my subject is, I'm going to watch my edges. Subject, light, composition. Composition means finding different angles. Anytime you have an opportunity to get up high and shoot down, that's a different view of things. There's a shot around the corner here I'm going to go do where I can show a boardwalk going right out to a little building right on the edge of the beach. So that will lead you right up to the building, brings the eye up to the most visible part of the scene. It's a great place to shoot pictures. I'm going to use a longer lens now to reach out and pick out some details here. The thing we have to be careful with is to make sure we're still getting sharp pictures. We can get in trouble with shutter speed with long lenses. A little bit of camera movement will mean a lot of blur in our pictures. So I'm at 200 ISO, I like to stay nice and low, but on a telephoto shot like this, I don't need depth of field. I'm shooting something that's maybe several hundred yards to a quarter mile away. So I'm not going to be at a small aperture. If I was at 11 or 16, I'm going to get a shutter speed so slow that I'm going to get blurry pictures. So instead, I'm going to open this up. I know I can get nice sharp pictures going wide open with 5.6 on this 80-400. So I'll open up to there, and let's see now. Now I'm up to a 500th, a 6/40th of a second. And with vibration reduction turned on, I'll have no problems getting a good sharp picture out of that. Inside the lighthouse is a fascinating space. It's cramped, it's small, but it's got this beautiful spiral staircase and brick walls and arched windows. And I thought, let's make a picture in here, but I need a subject more than just the staircase and the walls. So I asked Amber to step in so I could do some portraits. Normally for portraits, you might be using a short telephoto lens or a 50 millimeter, but if I'm doing that in there, you won't see any of the surroundings. So I chose to use a fisheye lens, lenses you would not normally use for portraits. So we've got a neat space here to work with Amber. Normally, the fisheye would probably be the last lens you would choose for doing a portrait. But again, we're working in this space. When I'm doing portraits, I'm still thinking subject, light, composition. And a lot of times, the space I'm in is going to determine what I'm doing with the light and where I position the subject. And taking advantage of the super wide, I can bring out some of the bricks and the stairs here and the lighthouse stairwell and the window here and the arch of the window. So she actually becomes a small part of the picture, but because she's a person, our eye is going to go immediately to her and then explore around the rest of the picture. Now the light in here is challenging. It's very contrasty. You'll notice I've asked Amber to stand here where she's going to be lit by the window. And I've actually got her face turned a little bit away from me so it catches the light coming into her face. Then I have to expose for that. If I'm in an automatic exposure mode, like I normally do in aperture priority, I'm going to be at about a -2 exposure compensation. This is one of those times where it might just be easier to go to manual, figure your exposure, and then shoot the pictures. Let's make some pictures. All right, Amber, that looks great right here. Now the other thing with high contrast light like this, I can switch my camera over and do some HDR, some in-camera HDR. So first I have to make sure that I'm set for JPEG. I can't do that with RAW. And then I'll go into my menus, find my HDR setting, and turn it on. Tell it I want a series because I want to shoot several pictures, not just one. And now when I shoot, you're going to hear a little bit of a different sound out of the camera because it's actually shooting 2 frames and then merging them together. All right, ready, Amber? That's perfect, just like that. Good, let's see how that's looking. Yeah, HDR means I'll pull more out of the shadows and I'll lessen the chance of blowing out highlights. Another great feature most Nikon DSLRs have is the retouch menu. That lets me take a picture that's still in the camera, bring it up on the LCD and make adjustments to it, and generate a new version of that picture on this camera on the card. It hasn't touched the original, it's made a new JPEG. This camera itself will actually let me do that with RAW files. Another great reason to take advantage of that RAW file format, because there are more adjustments I can make to a RAW file. For instance, I've got a picture I took of Amber in the lighthouse in the stairwell. There wasn't a lot of light in there, her face is well lit, but the bricks around her are pretty dark. I'd like to see more detail out of those. I can actually do that right in camera. First, I preview the picture, then I go into the menu and go into the retouch menu and say I want to select that picture. Once I've done that, I open it up into the retouch itself, and I can scroll down and change things like white balance, exposure compensation, picture control, but where I'm going here is all the way down to something called active delighting. Active delighting pulls more detail out of shadows without lightening the highlights, exactly what this picture needs. And I'm going to select high 2, and it looks great then. At this point, I can simply say execute, and that's when it generates that new JPEG. So now on this camera, I have the original RAW file, and I have the new JPEG that's been adjusted to open those shadows. I love exploring and I'm curious, and that's a great combination to have as a photographer. You always want to be saying to yourself, what's around the next corner? So I wanted to explore the lighthouse grounds. Amber and I went into the museum next to the lighthouse, and inside there they have a beautiful light fixture that used to be up in the lighthouse. I love the light on the wall coming through the lens. Let's see what happens if I ask you to stand here facing me and let that light hit your face. Oh yeah, that's neat. We get great catch lights and sort of stripes of light and a shadow there. So what we've done is we walked into the building here, and it's a museum with an old lighthouse lens, and it's got a light inside it that's pushing all these colored patterns on the wall, which makes a great background for us. And when Amber came over here into the light, we saw that we're getting these streaks of color and light across her face. So it makes for a neat picture, but it's a little more challenging. So I've got a beautiful scene there. The challenge is going to be an exposure. So you always have to think subject, light, composition. I've got my subject, I've got my composition here. Now I'm going to work with that technical issue of light. The light on the wall is much brighter than the light in her face. There's a narrow edge I need to walk there. Rather than just shoot a bunch of pictures changing exposure, hoping I get one right, I'll rely on my camera's highlight and histogram display to guide me there. So in this case, I'm going to go to manual exposure, because I want to find my exposure and kind of lock it down. If I start, and I usually do it manual at 0 exposure compensation, what I'm going to have is an overexposed picture, because I've got so much darkness here and few bright areas. And I'm going to use the flashing highlights and histogram to help guide me to the right exposure. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll start at 0 compensation, 60th at 1.8. Good. I look at that. This is a tricky situation to work in, and I'm using a fast lens. I want to use it wide open, so I hold shallow depth of field. Now, at no exposure compensation, at 0, which is what I always start with in manual, I've got overexposed highlights. I can see the highlights flashing in the back of my picture, and if I look at my histogram display, I'm also seeing it hitting the wall, hitting that right wall, which is indicating overexposure as well. So we're overexposing sections of it. So let me just dial my shutter speed up. I'm adjusting my shutter speed, not my aperture, because I want to take advantage of that shallow depth of field, just the eyes in focus, get those catch lights. Let the background go a little out of focus with that beautiful shadow behind Amber's head, nice. Go up to 100th of a second. Let's look at that, and I can still see my histograms hitting the wall a little bit. I can refer back to the highlight display, and I've got maybe just a teeny bit of clipping, but I know I'm overexposing, so let's drop that a little more. So from 100th maybe to 160th, let's check that. Histogram looks good, highlights look good. Now I can concentrate on making the picture. That's great, the light is in there just perfectly. That's great. Let me have you open your face up that way a little bit and the eyes back to me. Since I'm working in manual exposure and I found the right exposure, I don't have to keep checking exposure. I can go in and check to make sure I'm sharp, because shooting this lens wide open, I could be just a little off and her eyelashes won't be sharp. So I'll check focus. I don't have to bother with exposure anymore. Yeah, that's looking great. Open your face this way a little more. Oh, right there, right there, right there. Perfect. Now look out to the light. Great. Nice. You're gonna love these pictures. I love doing long exposure pictures. Of course, I still need a subject. And being at the lighthouse, there's a beach nearby, so I wanted to head over there and walk along and see what I could find. There were some nice rocks, one in particular that had some lines in it, so that was going to be my subject. When I'm doing a long exposure, I'm going to have to be on a tripod. So the first thing I do is figure out what my subject is, where my camera needs to be, then I put the tripod there.
What I'm doing here is trying to do a slow shutter speed blur of the water breaking across the rocks. Trick is not falling in. If I just shot it at a normal exposure, left the camera on auto, or did the way we'd normally work in this kind of light, it'd stop the water, I'd have a bunch of rocks with a little water splashing around. But by forcing that shutter speed low, I'm able to make something different.
To get a slow exposure, you do 3 steps. I'm going to lower my ISO as much as possible, close my aperture down as much as possible. That'll give me the longest possible shutter speed. If you don't have a lot of light, you may be able to get down to 1/8 or 1/4 second or maybe a second. If that works for you, great. If it doesn't, then how do you get a longer exposure? And the answer there is by adding a neutral density filter to the front of your lens. A neutral density filter is a dark filter that reduces the light coming through. It's kind of counterintuitive as filters go. Most of the time, we're trying to let more light in our camera. We're trying to avoid low light situations. Now we're going to force the camera to have to use even a slower shutter speed. So a 6 or an 8 or even a 10-stop neutral density filter could let you, even in sunshine, get up to a 15 or 20 or even 30-second exposure. I can also use the retouch menu to have some fun creative control over my pictures. And I've got some ideas of what I'd like to do with this, but it's going to require some editing, and I'm going to go ahead and use the retouch menu to do that. Since it's a raw file, I first tell the camera I do want to work on the raw file. Then when I open it into the retouch menu, I can change those parameters. And what I want to do here is get more contrast out of it. And I can do that by changing the picture control to vivid. Vivid will give me more saturation and contrast. I hit execute and it generates a new JPEG. That little paintbrush on the upper left indicates this is a new file, it's been edited, and it's now a JPEG. Now I've got that JPEG available to me here. I'm going to open that JPEG into the retouch menu and go a bit further. So I'm going to come back into the retouch menu and I'm going to trim it. I want to change the shape of this image. And when I choose this and bring it up, my back command dial, main command dial where my thumb is, lets me change shape, and I like that 16:9. My plus and minus buttons lets me make that larger or smaller. I simply hit the OK button, and it generates yet another JPEG. So I started with one original NEF. I went in and adjusted that in picture control to give it more contrast, was what I was going for, generated a JPEG from that, and then cropped it to 16:9 and generated another JPEG, all from that one original NEF file. When you find yourself indoors under artificial light, that's one of the most challenging situations a photographer can be in. A friend of mine, Ernest, plays trombone at a jazz club. He wanted some new photos, so we arranged to meet at the club before they opened. That would let me do a little more. That sounded great, Ernest. Tonight I'm in a jazz club and I'm going to do some photos of Ernest. I'm going to start by working with the available light and work through what we can do to make as good a picture as possible. And then I'm going to switch to using speed lights so I can take more control of the light and be a little more creative with the pictures. So the first thing I want to do, Ernest, is, that's a good pose. Bring your right hand up a little higher on your thigh. That's it, nice and relaxed. Maybe bring your horn up just a tad. Good, good. And let the top tilt out. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and shoot a picture. Looking good. That was really long, wasn't it? So a lot of times we rush into taking pictures. And what I did was I walked in here, I had my camera set the way I normally do if I'm outside, without stopping to think, oh, there's a lot less light in here and maybe the color's a little different. So, you know, that was a 4 or 5 second picture, and if I'm trying to make art, I got a good shot. But if I'm trying to get a good picture of Ernest, it's probably not what he's looking for or what I'm looking for. So let's walk through that. You know, we talk about subject, light, composition. Ernest is my subject, I'll work with him some. I have to look at the light and I have to start thinking, what am I going to do with exposure and with color? So exposure, you know, a 4 or 5 second exposure is not going to work. Even on a tripod, asking somebody to hold still that long is almost impossible. I'm going to raise my ISO, I'm going to push it up to 4000. This is an f4 lens. Let's take advantage of it. I'll open it all the way up to f4. I'm in aperture priority automatic metering, which means I know that in this scene, which is a lot of dark tones, I'm probably going to need to use some minus exposure compensation. So let me go ahead and dial in, let's be crazy, I'm going to go for a -2. All right, right at me. That's good, just like that. Nice, let's see how that's going. Okay, so that's looking really good, which it should, because you're a good-looking guy anyway. Let me do a few more like that. Actually, I love that smile, so turn that smile on for me, Ernest. There it is. You'd rather not smile, wouldn't you? Oh, you know, drop your head. That's kind of neat, too. Good, good. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. What else could I do to make this a little better? Well, this is an f4 lens. It's the 24-to-120, really sharp, wide open. But what if I was using a faster lens, say a 2.8 or a 1.8 or a 1.4? So in this situation, a 50mm 1.8 or a 50mm 1.4 or a 35mm fast lens, any of those would give me more aperture to work with, so I could either use a higher shutter speed or a lower ISO. Either one, which would probably benefit me. Right now, I'll work with what I've got. Go ahead and give me a couple of notes. I'm going to get a few shots of you playing. Great, now just hold that where you are down, but not with it extended. Yeah, like that, great. So those are looking really good, but I don't have any control over the situation I'm in. I can't control the intensity, I can't control the direction of the lights, I can't control the color. So I have to work within those constraints. And I've done that, but that's as far as I can go with that. If I want to go a little further creatively, I need to create the light myself, and I can do that with flash. I'll start with flash on camera, and then I'll start bringing in some off-camera light. So we're going to keep everything just the way you are, Ernest. I'm going to turn on my flash, but I've got to reset my camera back to how I would be if I was using flash. When I'm using flash, I like to be in manual exposure mode, so I'm controlling what's going on. So I'll flip it over to manual. I have to think about the things that I changed before. Let's drop my ISO back down to 200, where I'd like to be. Let's check my white balance. Instead of auto, I'll set it for flash. Because I'm using Nikon flash, I'll use Nikon speed lights. They're dialed in to match the camera. Okay, now that I've got that done, let's check my exposure. I'm manual. I'm going to go 250 a second at f4. If I turn off the flash and shoot at 250 at f4, actually, let's do f5, because the flash won't care. Look right at me, Ernest. So at those settings in this light, I end up with a black frame, and that's what I want. I want to take the available light out of this equation. The only light I want on Ernest is the light that I'm creating, that I'm bringing to the table. So let's start. I can pop up my flash and use direct flash from the camera. I'll go ahead and shoot a frame. There we go. So I fired flash, and I end up with a flash picture, just what you'd expect. He's lit just fine. But fine is not what I'm going for. Plus, because I'm using flash on camera, I'm throwing a little bit of a shadow behind him. It's also flat light. It's coming directly at him. You know, the whole rule of don't have the sun directly behind you. I would like to have direction with my light. So I'm going to bring another speed light in that I can use off camera. I generally start with my main light about 30 to 45 degrees off camera. And right now, I'm going to turn on this speed light and set it on remote mode. Remote mode means that it's going to be controlled by the pop-up flash on the camera. To do that, I have to go into my menus, go into commander mode, and tell it what I want it to do. Now, by default, built-in flash will be set for TTL, proper exposure. That's good. That's great because that's what's going to happen with my built-in flash, but it's also going to talk to any speed lights around. So now that I've got that turned on, let's take a picture of Ernest. And what we get is another properly exposed picture, but the light's not that interesting because I'm letting the onboard flash put out as much light as is coming in from the side, so I'm not getting that side directional light. Instead, I want to come into commander mode and I want to turn off the built-in flash. I only want the light coming from the side here. So I'm going to say OK to that. That's good. Just drop your chin a little bit, Ernest. Perfect. There we go. Good, good, good. So the beautiful thing about commander mode is it gives me two main things. It lets me control groups of speed lights separately. So if I want to use more than one group, not just one light, one group of speed lights, I can, and I can adjust their power individually from the camera. So in fact, if I want to take the power down on this, all I have to do is come into commander mode, go in there and tell it with group A, which is what that is set for, less exposure. I'll go -1, and I can shoot another picture. Excellent. OK. Now, what I'm getting is one light coming direct in on Ernest. That is a small light source, which means it's creating hard-edged shadows in his face. That can be very dramatic. But what if I want a softer look? That means I need to change the size of the light source. Easiest way to do that right off the bat is just to add an umbrella. So let's do that. I'm going to bring this umbrella and I'm going to put it into my bracket here. So once I've mounted the umbrella in here, I'm going to turn it around and position it. That's about right. So let's see what happens now. Right here, good. So what I'm getting now is a softer light in his face, less hard-edged shadows. But what if I want to do a little more to separate him from the background? I've got a couple options. I could drop my shutter speed way down to try to pick up some of the available light, but I'm also probably going to end up with a white balance issue then. So instead, I'm going to add a second speed light. I'm going to get one and set it up for the background here. So my goal here is to light the brick wall back here, simulate a little bit how it looked with the available light. And what you're going to see when I do this is the color is going to be different. It's not putting out white light, it's going to put out orange light because this comes with two color correcting gels, one orange and one green. The point of those gels or filters is for correcting if you're working in incandescent or fluorescent light. You put that on the front of your flash, and now it's putting out that color light which would match your fluorescent or incandescent setting in your white balance. In this case, because I'm staying on flash white balance, which is essentially daylight, this is going to create orange light on the background. Now I've got that speed light set for group B because again, I can separate what I'm doing with the speed lights. One of the great things of commander mode. And I'm going to go in and turn off the light that is illuminating Ernest. The reason I want to do that is I want to turn that light off so I can see exactly what's happening to the background light, to see what it is doing on the wall back there. I'm going to put it in manual full power. Ernest, you're doing great. Bring that right hand up. Good. That's perfect. And let's see here. OK, so I'm seeing a nice silhouette behind him, but I want to power it down. It's a little brighter than I'd like to do it. Simply come into commander mode, and remember that backlight I have as my B group. So I go into the B group, and I'll take that down from full power to maybe 1/4 power. That ought to do it. Right here is good. Oh yeah, that looks great. It's just enough light back there to silhouette Ernest. Now I want to turn the group A light on. I don't have to go over there. I do it from the commander mode. Group A, I'll turn it back on. Remember, I have it on TTL power, so it's judging exposure properly to match my 200 ISO f5. So that's working really well if I want to light the background, but what if I want to separate him without lighting the background? All I'm going to do is go out there and turn that light to hit him from behind. Let's see what happens then. So this time what I've done is taken the light off the wall, aimed it at the back of Ernest. That's great. So now I'm getting this nice orange light rimming him. So in just a few steps, I go from available light to direct flash. Direct flash just gives me light, but it's not interesting. Then I bring in commander mode so I can get speed lights away from my camera, control them individually, start either going direct with hard light on him, or soften it with something like an umbrella or another modifier, or even add a second speed light to the background, doing more with light. Once you get started with flash, it's almost endless the different things you can do with it. Want to have some fun? Good. That's great. Thanks for joining me in today's class. We truly went beyond the fundamentals of photography. Remember, we built everything off those three keystones: subject, light, composition. Using those three things, working through them, we can conquer the most challenging lighting situations. And we had a lot of fun doing people photography, which I think is a really enjoyable type of photography to do. Now the key is to take what you've learned and get out there and make pictures. Remember what the goal of photography is. It's not just about pictures, it's about having fun. It's about releasing your creative inner self. So get out there, do that, and have a blast with your camera.